Welcome everyone to another Turning Point Australia interview. This week I'll be talking with Campbell Newman, former Queensland Premier. He is running in the Senate in Queensland up against Pauline Hanson and Clive Palmer and the major parties as well. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what you guys think about our interview. Now the interview's already happened, but I had a bit of an embarrassing moment where I did it on Zoom and I lost my visual, but at least you get to see his visual so you can really get a good read on him as a candidate. That's not going to happen again. I'm not going to allow that to happen again. But here's the interview. I hope you guys really enjoy it. We talked about the South Australian election. We talked about the results over the weekend, where defence is going, the Freedom Manifesto that the Liberal Democrats have put forward, and we discussed a number of other things to do with how to make sure the pandemic doesn't happen again with the totalitarianism, the lockdowns and the mandates. I hope you guys enjoy it. Give it a share. Remember to get it out there and give it a like as well. And if you liked it, if you want to see another person on after him, leave it in the comments and I'll see you guys all later. But enjoy the conversation. Campbell, welcome to the show.
Great to be with you, Joel, and great to be with all your viewers. Yeah,
I'm really looking forward to having this discussion because you have an immense level of knowledge. Being in one of the really high spots in the Liberal Party, you have an understanding of the way the Liberal Party ticks. I was wondering if you could share some of your insight with regards to the South Australian election. And before you answer, just to give the audience a bit of a background, on the weekend, it's fair to say the Labor Party absolutely floored the Liberal Party in South Australia. It's looking like it's going to be a very serious remoulding of politics in South Australia. A bit of the background, over the last 20 years, we've seen an immense civil war go on in the Liberal Party in South Australia. Similar to Queensland, there isn't really a National Party presence, and most Conservatives and moderate Liberal Party members are in the Liberal Party, so they don't have that split. Sort of the Nationals keep the Liberal Party honest. They're split and they're all combined into this one party. And it's been really interesting to see what's been going on with Christopher Pyne, no longer engaged in the upper house, no longer engaged in the federal parliament. He's now engaged in state politics behind the scenes, and it's really started to tear apart the Liberal Party from what I've seen. Now, Campbell, am I completely wrong on that? Where does the Liberal Party go in South Australia after being dealt this massive blow?
Well, I'm not sure that I want to give them too much advice because, frankly, the Liberal Democrats, which I joined in August last year after a 40-plus year association with the Liberal Party and the LNP, I left in disgust. And what I've seen in South Australia fills me with disgust as well, because you've had a battle between people who are wets or left-wingers in the Liberal Party, and you mentioned Pyne, versus the Conservative side of the House. And it's been pretty brutal, no holds barred. I mean, we heard stories some months ago about people from, I suppose, a Christian background, a conservative background, who were stopped from actually joining the Liberal Party. So there's been a lot going on there. But in terms of why they lost, the bottom line was you had a Premier and a government that weren't true to the values of the Liberal Party. And what are the supposed values of the Liberal Party? Well, the values of the Lib Dems, frankly, basically the Liberal Party is meant to be about small government, about balanced budgets, about keeping debt low, about keeping taxes and charges as low as possible, and letting people get on and live their lives. And that's, again, why I'm with the Lib Dems. And instead, you've got a South Australian Premier, a former Premier, who really seemed to be very left-wing. And also there was I sensed almost a left-wing snobbishness in that. I think one of the big things that he did that really got people upset was not continuing on with the V8s. Paul Murray on Sky News has said that. I think Paul Murray's dead right. A lot of people really enjoyed the V8s. I mean, I love the V8s. I love the technology. And I don't know why you wouldn't continue to get behind a motor race like that. That's just an example. So I think also the Liberal Party were totally outgunned in terms of campaign. The Labor Party ran a very professional, disciplined campaign, and the Liberals seem to be amateurs by comparison. And I suppose the other final one is the issue of COVID. And I don't take the same view that some people have taken, where they've been saying, oh, it's because he sort of opened up and then there were cases and people thought. It wasn't that. It was that he outsourced the whole thing and stood back and let the chief health officer run it, and he wasn't at the forefront of things. And if he had taken control, taken command, if he'd looked commanding, if he'd actually at times said, well, we're not going to do that. So again, people are saying that maybe he was hammered for lightening up on COVID. Well, I say he would have done much better if he had actually realised the impact on businesses, livelihoods, on people's freedoms, and actually made a statement on that. Finally, it's like this. Just like Zach Kirkup in WA, Joel, who went green left and suffered a terrible defeat with a primary vote below 30%, this bloke, Steve Marshall, did similar things, and not as dramatically, but that's where he went. And, I know some people say, well, but hang on, Newman, you're a one-termer, you got hosed out as well. Well, I'm proud about being hosed out with a primary vote of 41.3%, which was more than the new Labor Premier in South Australia got.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is we did a lot of strong, difficult things and we lost, but we had a high primary, whereas the two Liberal governments, the two Liberal party efforts in WA and SA, where they got hosed out, primary votes of very low sort of support from the traditional base, because the base has deserted them.
It's astonishing. There's so much that's changed over the last, the last maybe 2 years with all these elections that have been going on. The primary votes, which for those of you listening, it's the first vote you give when you go give your ballot. It's amazing how much that's dropped off. I mean, I was listening to
Joel.
It really is. I mean,
it's all a splintering to people like ourselves in the Liberal Democrats, to One Nation, to Family First. They're all people who would normally have rallied around the Liberal Party, 20 years ago, but they've left.
In the, I think it was the Hunter by-election, I remember listening to John Anderson, former Deputy Prime Minister, talk about the primary vote that they used to get up there, the 35 plus, percent of the vote. It's insane where it's gone right now. But in South Australia, guys, I did totally forget to say, yes, Campbell Newman used to be in the Liberal Party, but he's now in the Libertarian Party, also known as the Liberal Democrats Party. And you guys are currently in the process of changing the name on that due to the unfortunate draconian laws that were passed by the major parties. But you're running in the Senate in Queensland. You're going to be up against Pauline Hanson and Clive Palmer, and we'll get to that in a second. But one of the big takeaways I got from the South Australian election was that there was a massive vote that grew in the minor parties over there. I mean, the fact that One Nation were getting something like 7% of the vote when they were used to be laughed at in the past is amazing to see. And I think it's a sign of things to come. But what lessons did you sort of get from the South Australian election that speak to you for the federal election? What trends can we expect?
Well, I suppose the first thing is that there is a fracturing of the Liberal or Liberal National Party vote. It's going to minor parties and independents. Therefore, it's very important for minor parties and independents to have tight preference arrangements to ensure that someone in the minor parties, a minor party candidate in each seat or in the Senate races, gets up. Otherwise, it just empowers the Labor Party particularly, and even potentially ultimately goes back to the coalition. So if people, when they're voting, absolutely need to follow the advice of people like Topher Field, who did a great video on the way that preference voting works. Make your vote count. That's critically important. It's also, and we're going to talk about, you mentioned Clive before, so we'll talk about him and why we came to an agreement with him. But those sort of arrangements are really important. We'd like to, obviously, as Liberal Democrats, particularly differentiate ourselves. We believe we have, and I'll just wave it around here. This is our policy platform. So it's the Freedom Manifesto. It covers 10 policy areas. It's available on our website, ldp.org.au/freedom. The point I'm making is I put forward, I think we're the only one of the minor parties that has a comprehensive platform. Other minor parties, with the greatest respect, have single issues they'll pursue here and there. We've got a philosophy across the board, which is anchored in the libertarian philosophical tradition, but it's across multiple areas. And here in Queensland as well, we're going to have local plans for various communities across the state about the things that we'd fight for Queensland. Whether it be Rockhampton or Charleville, we'll be talking to specific issues as well.
Well, can we go there, Campbell? With regards to the last maybe 3 or 4 weeks, we've been seeing the Ukraine-Russia crisis COVID's completely disappeared. In terms of the national discussion, it is not even on the radar right now with what's been going on. Obviously, we've been talking about the recovery, but I can't help but feel that a lot of the freedom parties that have been completely blindsided because they haven't talked about national defence at all. So what is the Liberal Democrats, if it has a whole encompassing manifesto, what is the Liberal Democrats' policy with regards to defence? Obviously, you can't summarise it in 2 seconds, but what's the general approach?
Well, I think you make a very good point that a lot of the freedom parties, I think, are missing the point at the moment because it is, I think, the case that the COVID stuff has disappeared into the background. It'll vary from state to state, but I think that, it's a diminished election issue now. People are far more concerned about actually cost of living, the inflationary pressures that are coming, the economy, and sort of domestic considerations. The Ukraine and national security is in the background, and obviously we've seen the Prime Minister trying to milk it for all it's worth. In terms of the Ukraine, what does it say? What is the Lib Dems sort of position? It says very clearly this, that we in Australia, whilst we have a fantastic long-standing alliance with the United States of America, we need to do a whole lot more to actually look after ourselves. And, one of the things that I'd be concerned about if I'm Senator for Queensland will be to and a former serviceman, by the way, I was in the Army for 13 years.
I didn't know that.
Pushing for better performance in the Defence Department. We don't have the timeframes that we had during the 80s and 90s to prepare for some sort of armed conflict in our region. The timeframes are far tighter. And so we need to make sure that we have certain capabilities. We need these nuclear submarines. We need a sovereign missile capability to deter aggressors, where we can actually manufacture these things onshore in Australia. So we have the guidance technologies, the capability to actually literally make the propellants, and all the wherewithal. And we also need to be able to actually train and mobilise units of the Army and indeed the Navy to be able to utilise these new weapons, because they will be incredibly powerful in saying to anybody who wants to try and lodge on the Australian mainland, if someone wanted to do us harm, that's something that really focuses the mind, if I can put it that way, of any potential aggressor. You want to come this way. If we can take out vessels at sort of 400 or 500 kilometres out, that's a big thing people have got to take into account. And we also need to get on and deal with some projects that are failing in terms of the frigate project, which isn't going well at the moment, and even some of the new, I think, lighter vessels. So it's about, in summary, it's about a sovereign capability. It's about not relying on the United States of America. Yes, valuing that alliance, but realising that people won't necessarily come and help you. So look at the Ukraine. My heart goes out to that nation and its people. I've been to Kiev. I've been there on a family holiday 3 years ago. I saw a freedom-loving people who had made a decision to vote against being part of, Russia, who back in 2014, who want to be independent and democratic and want to be aligned to the West, and yet the West is, yes, providing them, a lot of wherewithal to fight a war, but it's not actually lifting a finger to stop the atrocities that are being committed against them. So it makes my blood boil. I'm not suggesting Australia should be getting involved directly. It's a European thing, but it just shows you that we can't necessarily rely on allies to come to our aid, because they'll be looking at it in the same light. Will America support Australia in its time of need. I think they will, but we shouldn't put put all our eggs in one basket and assume that's the case. So we need that sovereign capability, and it needs to happen onshore in Australia.
I think one of the interesting topics that's come up, obviously, out of the Ukraine-Russia crisis is what is going to happen with China, what is going to happen with Taiwan. What's the Liberal Democrats' view on how we prepare for that specifically?
Well, I think it's pretty much what I just sort of said to you. We've got to have our own capability.
Sure.
I think that, I understand totally China's historic claims on Taiwan. But again, we've got a democracy of over 20 million people who don't actually want to be part of the regime run by the China's Communist Party. While they might have sort of cultural, historical ties and relationships with mainland China, they want to have their own, I think, self-determination. That's absolutely crystal clear. And I've been there on many occasions. I think we've got to continue to make that point. I think we've got to be prepared to back up the Taiwanese. But I will say the thing about the Ukrainian conflict is that I think it sent a very strong message that there are incredible ramifications for China should the Communist Party try and take over Taiwan. I think if there's anything that's so far that's good coming out of what is a bloody and awful confronting war, it's that at least the Western world has shown with its approach in terms of sanctions, economic sanctions, exclusion from financial markets and the like, that's something that I think perhaps the Chinese Communist Party didn't expect. And I think it has sent a strong message. I mean, if the thing about war is the country who's seeking to be an aggressor, to start a war, is doing this calculation. They need to actually literally say, is the risk of doing this worth the expense? And for China, which is a trading nation, it relies on raw materials from Australia and other countries, but it wants to manufacture goods and actually export them to the West. To see what's happened to Russia is a big deal. It would lead to incredible economic dislocation and a threat to the ongoing dominance of the CCP. So I think that's been at least one good thing that's come out of the last sort of 3 or 4 weeks.
Joe Biden, in his recent State of the Union speech, mentioned that he's authorised the construction of a $20 billion facility to do semiconductor chips, to manufacture them. It's so strange talking, and I don't mean this in a demeaning way because this is where politics is going, but it's so strange talking to a minor party to have in their manifesto a plan for this, because there could be a real possibility that in the Senate, senators like yourself, if you're elected, and One Nation senators and other freedom senators that come together could actually control the balance of power and push things through. So is there anything in your manifesto about semiconductor chips in...
Not specifically, Joel, but I guess
sure.
it goes back to the philosophical standpoint. So there's a range of issues that could confront a politician on any day in their life as serving the people. And those of us who have a strong philosophical bedrock, if I can call it that, will make judgments as these issues come up. The problem with the Liberal Party today is that they'll do it on the basis of polling, what the community think. They won't do what's right. They won't actually stand up and say, for example, it's wrong for the Victorian police to fire baton rounds at protesters and use pepper spray, for example. They're not doing that because the Prime Minister's made a judgment that apparently people across the board think somehow, they shouldn't be protesting. So that's an example of a party that's rudderless and has no values or principles anymore. So back to your question, as a party of small government, minimal interference in our lives, balanced budgets, low debt, etc. How do we deal with issues as they come up? Well, when it comes to these issues, we will be about Australia and self-reliance. We don't like the idea of protectionism. We don't like the idea of, government getting in the way and saying you can't do stuff. And for example, foreign companies can't, invest here. But I'd flip it around and say, if you adopted the policies of the Lib Dems, which are about low tax, reducing red tape on companies, IR reform, reducing the cost of energy, you actually can have a manufacturing capability in Australia that's competitive. What our politicians today won't say, Joel, is the reason that they all got on the bandwagon the last 18 months, 2 years, saying we've got to make stuff in Australia. Well, yeah. Ding bloody dong, mate. I mean, the reason it's all gone overseas is because we've got high labour costs and poor workplace productivity. We've got very high energy costs, and it takes forever to get approvals to build things in local government around the nation because of the stupid legislation from state governments. If we have less regulation and lower taxes, and we actually say we need a capability to say a defence capability in this area, you know what, mate? People will deliver. There's plenty of entrepreneurs who want to deliver these things, and it will happen in Australia, but it won't happen with the policies of the incumbent major political parties. That was a long answer, but it's about values. Values make a difference. If you have the right values, then you can make a call on any of these policy issues as they come up.
Yeah, self-reliance, bring manufacturing back, make sure we make stuff here. So I like it.
But create an environment where entrepreneurs, where Australians who want to actually create products or services can actually be encouraged to do so. And the best way to do that is to get out of their way, not have the red tape, and actually ensure that if they make money, they get rich. There is nothing wrong with that. That's how, that is a huge motivator, and we'd be a lot better off. We won't get these things by taxing our way to self-reliance or onshore manufacturing. Yeah.
Absolutely. Before I alluded to the fact that we could see a situation where there's a coalition of senators after the election that come together. I call them freedom senators, so that's one nation. Maybe the UAP, maybe the Lib Dems come together and they start to do some collective bargaining on some of the Freedom Manifesto stuff, I guess you could say.
Absolutely.
I thought this was quite interesting, and I don't mean to press on an old wound, but when you were Premier, you obviously did have some disagreements with Clive Palmer in the past. Why is it? What's changed? Why is it that you sort of come together now?
Okay, well, that's a really good question. So back well before I decided to leave the Liberal National Party and join the Lib Dems, I'd actually sort of caught up with Clive Palmer on a few occasions on some other matters to do with public policy. So I'm on the board of a thing called the Australian Institute of Progress, and we had sat down with him on a few occasions over lunch to discuss some of the policy things that we wanted to see championed and to see if he was interested in that. So the bottom line is we rebuilt the bridge, if I can call it that. So I'm not sure what his real objectives are in this election, but I've been more than happy to come to a preference agreement with him where, he's advocating that, after, he obviously wants people to vote 1 for the UAP, but they'll give a number 2 to yours truly and vice versa. And that's appropriate. It's, I haven't joined the UAP. I haven't joined Mr. Palmer, but, it makes sense. And similarly with One Nation, we're giving 3, it's a 3-3 sort of recommendation. And I want to stress though, just on preferences, of course, it's the voters' decision. We as parties don't own your vote. You get to decide the thing that's thrust into your hands at a polling booth as you try to get in unscathed. That is just a recommendation. That's just a piece of paper that suggests how to maximise your vote. And we're saying, as I said before, that if you actually want to get change, if you want to sort of send a message to the Labor Party, the Libs and the Nats and the Greens, and if you want to send them a message and try and get new blood into the parliament, please look at the voting recommendations of the minor parties. But look, yeah, Clive and I get on fine. He's a larger-than-life character. Again, I don't know exactly what he's really trying to do in this election, but so be it. That's our democracy at work.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been one of the most frustrating things trying to explain to people how the preferencing system works. We're talking people, in the boomer generations that have seen 11 elections, still don't understand how elections work in that sense. A lot of people do accuse parties, and I'm going to give you a bit of defense on this. A lot of people do accuse the UAP or the Liberal Democrats of selling your vote to other parties. It doesn't work like that. Under the old system, parties could sort of barter and they could say, okay, we'll send preferences here and whatever. That's not how it works now. Now it just works with how to vote cards, where it's a recommendation. The power of the voter is in the voter's hand. They can pick how they want to number it. And
Joel, they can vote any way they like. But I guess my position would be, it's like this. If you want to get the same result, keep voting the same way. So I'm appealing today, like if you've got some Labor voters watching or coalition voters, it doesn't matter. But if you vote the same way, you're going to get the same result. So I'd urge people to really think about their voting choices this election. I mean, come up with your own views. I mean, obviously, but really think about who you want to vote for and try and seek out information about the candidates in your area and see what they're really talking about. And, I think one of the biggest problems is we actually don't know our elected leaders. I mean, I'm dismayed with the coalition because they have so many people now who haven't had lives outside of politics. So they don't actually have real world experience. So why is that important? Well, if you think about what's happened with COVID, 2 years of COVID, if you've never run a restaurant or a coffee shop or some other small business, how could you possibly understand what it means if you suddenly shut down and opened up and maybe opened up again, but you have to check people's vaccine status or you've got to wear masks. And no, you don't have to wear masks, or you can only have so many people per square metre, constantly changing rules and change at a moment's notice. People who've never had real jobs can't begin to understand the impact and the trauma they've caused. And that's why I'm here.
It's absolute madness. What tricks do you suspect the Prime Minister, not tricks, sort of messaging, do you think the Prime Minister is going to try and use to rekindle his base back? Because he's obviously been, it looks like they're going to have their budget. I do believe that's happening in the next week. And there might be a bit of a cash splurge, I've heard. Yep. What sort of tricks do you suspect, being a former Liberal man yourself?
Look, Joel, I don't know that he really is going to get this right. I mean, I think, there's going to be a lot of money spent here and there by the coalition. But, that's part of the big problem, because the word you just used with me, to get his base back, I don't know that he will get his base back by doing those things, because what he's done, sadly, since he got elected in that surprise election win in 2019, by the way, when I supported him very strongly. So I used to think the world of this bloke, but he's gone from he's gone for me to the doghouse, over the last 2 years particularly. So the reason he's lost his base is because he has abandoned the values of the Liberal Party. He doesn't support small business properly. He just mouths platitudes. He doesn't have a set of principles he sticks to. He's about big government, big unions, big business, big spending, big debt. There's a chart in here which I will try and find very quickly. There it is. Okay, so like once upon a time, the Liberal Party were about good economic management. This is Australia's debt. The Blues, what the coalition have done. The Reds, what the Labor Party did. So the coalition spent years saying we're better economic managers. They haven't even got that anymore. So to get his base back, if he'd taken a stand on free speech, he might have improved his position. If he hadn't given $3 billion extra to the ABC, he might have improved his position. If he'd said to Aboriginal groups who wanted the rights to be able to use the Aboriginal flag, rather than provide $20+ million of taxpayer dollars, if he'd actually said to them, well, if you want it, you buy it, like anybody else would, he might have got his base back. But he continues to do things which are actually against what the Liberal Party base expect, and that will be his undoing. So I just don't know that he's going to get back there. I just don't see how he claws back. The only way I see him winning the election now is if Albanese really makes a big mistake. And I think this stuff with Kimberley Kitching and, involving, Wong, Gallagher and Keneally could hurt. That could be one of those things because it really raises questions about Albanese's leadership. But it won't be anything that Morrison does. It's about whether Albanese makes a mistake now.
Campbell, I want to keep this short and sweet, and I want to thank you for your time, but I could talk to you for hours. Notice we barely touched on the COVID stuff this time because I thought we've spent 2 years talking about it. I really did feel that, there are a lot of other issues we needed to address, but Campbell, thank you so much for your time. Did you have any other messages you wanted to send out to the audience?
Oh, look, just on, I might just raise it because you've talked about it a bit.
Go for it.
COVID for the first, if we go back to 2020, from March through to about May, June, I thought what happened was probably okay in the circumstances they had to. There was a lot of disorganisation. There was a lot of mistakes made that we saw. Give them a bit of a leave pass across the board. I'm talking about state and federal. But since then, it's been a massive overreaction. I mean, I went on a business trip in November, December 2020. We flew to regional Queensland on a plane. We didn't have to wear masks. But then in March last year, suddenly you have to wear masks. So what I'm saying to you is as the pandemic has progressed, the restrictions became more onerous, more authoritarian, more illogical, downright brutal in some cases, and that speaks volumes. It's been about control. It's not been about the science, and it really is going to take a long time for many people in politics to reclaim my faith, because I just think I don't think the federal government did a good job. I don't think state governments did a good job. The New South Wales government probably did the best, but there were many things that they got wrong as well. So those are my thoughts, and it's covered in the Freedom Manifesto. We believe, and we've said since August last year, we need to get on with it. Protect the vulnerable. Everybody else should be getting back to work and living their lives freely.
Campbell, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks,
and everyone, if you're listening, please give this a share, get it out there. I love all the freedom parties. The Liberal Democrats are one of those freedom parties, and ultimately I trust them all to band together and get rid of this COVID stuff and make sure it never comes back again. But Campbell, thank you again so much for your time.
Thanks, mate.
I hope you really enjoyed that discussion. I'm really looking forward to seeing how Campbell Newman goes in the federal election in May, among other parties as well. I'm also looking forward to seeing what you write in the comments. Did you like the discussion? Who do you want to hear from next? Next week, I've got a big pipeline of interviews coming up. We're ramping up to election season right now, and it's going to be absolutely crazy. You're going to be bombarded by all different sides, but don't worry, I've got you. I've got your back. And I want to thank you all for having my back as well. If you want to donate and if you want to support the work that I do, please consider donating in the link above. It really helps what I do on PayPal as well. And give this a share because it's the best way to get the freedom message out there. I'll see you guys later and take it easy.